Good morning, everyone. Yesterday, we began in Lekuti Torah. And in Lekuti Torah, we're learning about the strange episode in the history of Judaism, which is the copper snake. The episode of the copper snake. The Jewish people were complaining, and it just got too much. And God sent serpents, some sort of bizarre snakes or something, to bite them and kill them, the Jews. And the people came to Moshe and said, "Stop it. We'll stop complaining. Just please stop these snakes." So Moshe said, "Okay, what do I do, God?" So God said, "Take a snake, make like a statue of one of these things." He must have been really pretty quick, Moshe. But he made one out of copper. And he put it on a snake, which was, I guess, enough of a replica of what these snakes were biting him to look like it was one of these snakes. And he put it up on a big stick, on a nace, it says, on a big stick, and that anyone who looked up at the snake would live, even if he was bitten by one of these poisonous snakes, which usually they would die, very quickly, but they didn't. So the Talmud asked the question, why put a snake? A snake doesn't cure. Why look at the snake? He says, no, it's not to look at the snake. It was to look up at God. And when they looked up in the direction of the heavens, is that cures. So the Rebbe says, first of all, it doesn't make any difference. What do you mean they have to look up in the heavens? God is found everywhere. So just think about God. He's creating everything, and stop thinking about yourselves. That's what he should have said. No, he said, look at the snake on the pole, but you're not really looking at the snake. You're looking at God. And so why didn't Moses just say, look at the sky? If that's what he wanted to inspire them, to see the sky, just like God creates the sky, so he creates you. No. So what's a snake got to do with anything? Why did God tell him to make a snake? And why did Moses make the snake? And why did he tell the people to look up at the snake and not to look up at God? And how did it work? How did it work? What was the point of the whole thing? What was the point of the whole entire business? Okay, so the Rebbe says like this. And the fact of the matter is, we have a thing nowadays which is called prayer. And prayer somewhat alleviates the darkness of this world. It sweetens up the darkness of the world. And says the Rebbe even more. The fact of the matter is that everything is being created by God. Everything is being created by God. And even more, everything is being created by God constantly. So some people will say, how can you say that? But God is creating the toilet. He's creating everything. God's creating everything. And there's some people that even thought this was one of the big things of the first Rebbe of Chabad, of the whole idea of Chassidut in general, that God is creating everything. And the opposers to it said that that's blasphemy. You want to see that God is creating the bad things he's creating. So the answer is yes, God is creating everything. And he's creating also terrible things that happen, the Holocaust, and everything is being created by God. Nothing exists without God making it exist. Basic reality of Judaism. Just look at the beginning of the Maimonides. It's a basic fact of Judaism, one of the 13 principles of faith, that God creates everything. Okay. So what? So when you reveal the good inside of everything, then that takes away the bad. Everything is good, but when it comes into this world and you don't see the source of it, so it's bad. It's a bad thing. Which, basically you can look at birth that way. Being born is terrible. The soul, before it was in the body, it was in heaven, and in heaven everything was, beautiful over there, and you felt God, and the goal is, right, say all these other religions in the world that, okay, we're just in this terrible situation, but let's not think so much about God. Let's think about ourselves. We got to get out of here. We have to, after you die, where do you go? If you mess up in this world, then you go to hell. If you do good, then you go to heaven. And we're going to teach you how to go into heaven. So Chassidut, Judaism, really comes to teach us, and that's what Chassidut comes to remind us, that that's Judaism. That it's not so. Going to heaven is not the goal, because if it is, then God comes out pretty cruel. right? The soul is up there in heaven, and God just sends the souls down here. Why? Why do we come down here? Because then you can go back to heaven. If you're really good, then you can go back to heaven. So that's really like cruel. It's like taking a rich person, stealing all his money from him, throwing him out in the streets, and say, if you really work hard, we'll give you your money back. You know. So the Rebbe says, no, you don't understand. That's not the point. The point is that this world contains in it, and even the bad things in it, contains in it amazing secrets which are not found even in the upper worlds. Amazing. It gives God pleasure. Huh? It gives nothing else gives God pleasure. Okay, that's sort of what they call anthropomorphizes God. It sort of makes God into a human being. But that's what it says in the Torah. Torah says that God gets pleasure from what we do. He gets pleasure. So when we do, it says this world is terrible. It says that's the whole idea. That's why prayer. It says in the first temple, before the first temple, they didn't pray at all. In the first temple, I mean, it's a commandment to pray. Whenever you need something, you're supposed to pray for it. But the situation wasn't so dire. In the second temple, there was more darkness in the world. So there was more troubles in the world, more egotism. And so they had to pray more to God. And it was turn to God more, less egotism. The world is a better place. And it says, okay. So it says all bad things are sweetened up from their source. From their source. Maybe I'll give you an example of this. Like I'm saying, I'm sort of steeped in the teachings of Professor Viktor Frankl. I read the books that he's got. He has a lot of books, but as far as I know, there's only 6 or 7 of them that are in English. I bought all the were in English and I read them. Okay, so one of the things he says, of course, is that everybody is really basically good, and and everybody is good. Basically, everyone is good. The soul is good. That's the idea of the soul. The soul is good. But for lack of a better word in English, I guess in German there's a better translation, but it's called the soul. His first book was called The Doctor and the Soul. He says everyone is good because the soul is good. What's the soul? The soul has a connection. It perceives things like love and faith and conscience. Oh, conscience is a big thing. So he says, so of course everybody asks him a question. How can you say everybody's good? Look at Hitler. But in fact, I don't agree with him with what he says over here, but that doesn't mean that he's not right. He says Hitler, he says if Hitler would have listened to his conscience, then he wouldn't have done what he did. That's what he said. Okay, I don't agree because there's the thing of Amalek and but that's according to what Hasidut teaches. But just let's say according to his way. If he would have listened to his conscience, he would have been okay. But he didn't listen to his conscience. So because he was not attached to right and wrong, so therefore he became evil. So that's something like what the Rebbe is saying over here. If the world becomes attached to its source, then it does away with evil. It does away with evil. Then there won't be bad in the world. The reason that people do sins and terrible things is because they think that they're alone. They think that they're alone, and then they think that they're God. So it says every bad thing in the world, if you can attach it to its source, you'll realize it. Not only you will that thing you won't. I'm sorry. That thing is good. In other words, the Holocaust is good. No, it'll stop the Holocaust. It'll stop it's a shocking thing to say, but everything is created by God, and God is good. So it says that's the whole point. The whole point is you have to everything the world is created. The source of the world that enlivens everything is good, which is God. Kamashal azona. Remember, this is what we learned yesterday. And it's the example of the prostitute. And now we're going to go further. Let's see. That's what we learned about yesterday, about the example of the prostitute that the king sends to tempt his son. Let's see if we can get this here. Oh. Okay, so this prostitute is trying to tempt his son to act like an animal, like a normal person, which will disqualify him from being king. So this prostitute is really very bad. It'll wreck the whole kingship. But she's there to test the son, to see what he's really made of, what's going on inside of him. Has he got the power to defy his own urges and lusts, which will make him eligible to be the king? Right? If a king has to think only about the country, only about the people, and forget about his own personal agenda. That's where the king is supposed to be. So she's there in order to test him. So she has to do a good test. So she has to be as enticing as possible. So in other words, her bad has to be the most, how do you say, best bad you can possibly find. Terrible. She has to really, really work at making this young prince sin. So ostensibly, if you look at her, what's going on from the outside, she's terrible. She's awful. She's destroying. She wants to destroy the whole country. But she's there to just for evil, to make the son act like a non-king, and to wreck everything up. So she's bad. Says, but the fact is that the king sent her. She doesn't. The prince doesn't know it, but the king sent her to test her son, to test his son. And if he can stand up against this test, which has to be a true 100% test, as he reveals the good, that he's really fit to be the king in this case. So he says, that says the Rebbe, that's what the Zohar says, that's what all the bad things in the world are. They are just various tests, either to get us to lust after something, or to get us depressed, or to get us angry, or to get us to addicted to something, or to worship idols, or all the other things. The world drives us crazy, or it fools us, or frustrates us, whatever it is, in order that we'll forget about God. That's the whole point. But in its source, the world, just like this prostitute, in its source, it's really good. It's being sent by God. And if we realize that, then the test goes away. So it says, therefore, we have to pray more and more in order to attach ourselves to the source, because the tests and the difficulties of this world are so real. We have to really work in order to not pay attention to the external, and to pay attention to the internal, right? And that's what Viktor Frankl was hinting at. Even if this evil Nazi would get to the source of it, and it was his conscience, and listen to his conscience he will discover the good that's there. Discover. That's the key word over here, is to discover. It is good. Good exists, and truth exists. We just have to discover it, and that's the idea of prayer. Namely, that God is the one that's enlivening all these bad things. And then when that happens, all of a sudden, it's not so bad anymore. We'll give a good example in a minute. If so, ein ra klal, if so, it ends up that there is no such thing really as bad. Everything in its source is good. Okay, so here's, what did I do? I skipped over here. What did I do? It was on, I'm sorry, I just skipped the line. In Ra Kalal, there's no bad at all. The Kain Kala Yasurim, and all the tortures and difficulties that are in the world, when you think about this, that we said that it all comes from Hashem, Yispardu Kol by Oven, then all bad will go away. And here we're going to have an example. Listen to this. I know everybody's asking a question, and I'm also asking the question. Don't think I understand this. I mean, I understand what the Rebbe is saying, but maybe I don't, because we see there's a lot of very religious people, and that they really truly believe in God, and that they suffer, right? In the Holocaust, they suffer. Okay, let's just leave the question for a minute. Let's go. I'm sure the Rebbe is also more aware of that than we are. I mean, the essence of what a Rebbe is that he feels the pain of all the Jews. So when people came to the Rebbe and said, I have such and such a pain, the Rebbe doesn't say, just pray, just return to the God, and be okay. Next, please. No. But the fact of the matter is, the fact that we've got a lot of questions is, okay, we've got a lot of questions. But the fact is still the fact. The fact is that God is creating everything, and that God is good. God is good. And everything bad that comes from God, including the enticement to do sins and the worst possible sins, this is all coming from God. And that if we would realize that, then we would realize it's just a temptation. It's just a test. It's just a test. Okay, here we go. Nachum ish Gamzu. Like the story of Nachum ish Gamzu. Where's the story? Nachum ish Gamzu. It's in the Talmud. In the Talmud. Nachum ish Gamzu. Where is it? In Tainus, I think. I learned it, but I forget these things. What are you going to do? And it's in the Gemara. What's Nachum ish Gamzu? Nachum ish Gamzu was a very, very holy Jew. He was one of the Tanaim, all these Tanaim, they call them the Pharisees. The Pharisees, they had the ability to raise the dead. A lot of them. And even says one place that the smallest of them had the ability. Tremendously holy person. Okay, so what's the story of Nachum ish Gamzu? He was old, he was holy, and he had a chance to save the Jewish people. How? They said there was a decree. So there was a decree of the Jewish people. And they sent him to the emperor of Rome with a box of jewels, diamonds, to placate the emperor of Rome. Now, the emperor of Rome, he's not lacking diamonds, but when he saw that the Jews made such a tremendous effort, he knew the Jews didn't have that much money. He saw that they made such a tremendous effort. Just one second, I'm just looking for this word. It says when he saw that they made such a tremendous effort, is that 1 second, let me just look over here. There we go. I'm sorry, 1 minute. Oh, so it says, what's the story? I'm just trying to find this over. I should reveal. I forget things. What are you going to do? Okay. So Nachum ish Gamzu, I'll find it. I'll have to find it later. Okay, so Nachum ish Gamzu, the story is like this. So they gave him a box of diamonds, and he's supposed to take this box of diamonds to the king. And on his way, so he's got this little box of diamonds, and he's holding a chest. And on his way, he stops off at an inn. And to sleep, whatever sleep. And the owner of the inn sees that he's holding onto this box. And it seems he was a good thief. So when Nachum ish Gamzu was asleep, or he wasn't watching, whatever, he went to sleep. So he picked the lock of this thing and took out all the jewels, and he filled it up with sand so that it weighed the same thing. It wouldn't notice. And he filled it up with sand. And Nachum ish Gamzu woke up in the morning, and he didn't sense that something was wrong. And he went to the king and he said, "Your Majesty, I have come from the Jews to request from you that you rescind your decree." The Tsar, the Caesar, or whatever, he made a decree on the Jews. It doesn't explain what the decree was, but he made a decree, and that all the Jews had to worship idols, whatever. It made a decree. He said, "I want that decree rescinded, and here is a gift for you, Your Majesty." The king opens up the box, and there's much of sand in it. So the king said, "What is this?" So Nachum ish Gamzu, his name was Gamzu. They called him Gamzu, which means also this, because his custom was when any bad thing ever happened, so he would say Gamzu Latova. He would say, "This is also good." Right? This is also good. That's what he would say all the time. So the box opened up, and instead of him saying, "Oh, wow, I'm really finished now. What's going to be with me? Your Majesty, please listen, I didn't put that in there. They must have stolen it." He didn't say any of that. He just said, "Gamzu Latova. This is also for the good. This is also for good." All of a sudden appeared a very honorable looking person that no one had seen before. But he was he demanded, attention and honor. So everybody stood up, and the Tsar, the Caesar, said, "Who are you?" He said, "I am a big minister, and I want to let you know, Your Majesty, that this sand is magical sand. And it's the sand that Abraham, the father of the Jews, used against his enemies. He had a lot of enemies, and he fought battles. It says in the Torah that he fought battles. And this sand, if you throw it at your enemy, it turns into arrows, and it hits everyone exactly between the eyes. Try it. So the king has the king tests it however he tests it, and it works. And he says, this is worth, what do you want? Nachum Ish Gamzu, what do you want? Said, all I want is that decree. Give me the decree. Bring the decree. Nachum Ish Gamzu tears it up. And he says, thank you, Your Majesty. He says, just 1 second. I want to bring 10 boxes like you have here. Fill them up with jewels, whatever you want to fill it up. And take this back home to the Jews. I keep the box with the sand. You keep the box. And so Nachum Ish Gamzu goes back home. And the hotel owner is very amazed to see that he's still alive. And he said, what happened? And he told him. So the hotel owner said, oh, I am so happy for you. It was so wonderful. And Nachum Ish Gamzu, I don't know who stole that money. I don't know who stole those jewels from you, but whoever did, we're going to find them. Don't worry. Nachum Ish Gamzu goes back with his jewels. I think he also sent a bunch of soldiers to protect them also. He went back. So this man sets out and he fills up like 20 boxes of the sand, the same sand, and he brings it to the king. And the king says, what is this? This is the same sand that man brought to you yesterday for your majesty. The king throws it, and it's sand. It's absolutely nothing. So he says, okay, bury him in the sand. Okay, and that's it. Okay, so happy ending, right? Happy ending. Nachum Ish Gamzu gets saved. Okay, but what do we see? That Nachum Ish Gamzu, if this man would not have changed it into sand, then who knows if the king would have been appeased. The king doesn't lack diamonds, right? They figured that the king would just be appeased from the gesture of whatever it is to placate the king. The Jews wanted to give him these diamonds. The king lacks diamonds, no, but he did lack the arrows that were in. Okay, so what do we see from the story? That it ended up coming out better that this hotel owner stole the diamonds, came out to be better, a bigger blessing than if he wouldn't have stolen the diamonds. Right? If he would have brought the diamonds, it's a doubt if the king would have been appeased. But now that he did steal the diamonds and put the sand there, it came out to be a sure thing that the Jews would be, but it came out to be better than diamonds, something the king really needed. Okay, number one. Number two, how did he transform this sand, the sand into arrows? Nachum Ish Gamzu, by saying, this is good. Now, it wasn't good. It wasn't good. He had diamonds. The diamonds are the tremendous expense to the Jews, and the diamonds are worth, let's say, $30 million, and he filled it up with sand, which is worth, maybe 2 cents. Maybe it's not worth anything. Well, how much sand is there in the world? But, and even worse, the sand was going to be his death warrant. The king looked at the sand and says, what's this? Off with his head. And it ended up that the worst thing possible, and Nachum Ish Gamzu saw death in front of his eyes. His only chance was these diamonds that he brought to the king, and now it's a bunch of sand. Now he made the king angry. Exactly the opposite. He said, this is also good. And all of a sudden, it turned out to be better than good. Good would have been the diamonds that he brought. This is even better. Okay, so here we go. Let's look at the story, what the Rebbe says. Here we go, 1 minute. Okay, like the story about Nachum Ish Gamzu. What's the story of Nachum Ish Gamzu? Gam, Kol Tzadikim, all of the other big tzaddikim in the Talmud, on this way. That by means of their prayers is that they transform bad to good. Al derech zeh similarly, Rak Nachum Ish Gamzu he could change Hamshacha Milamayla from above to below, Shahaya Nira, that it seemed that it would be revealed, the be'emes, that really below how it is here in the world, that it's good. That a terrible thing transformed to be good. And therefore, Nikra, that's why his name is called Gamzu, also this. Also this. This, the word this means that it'll be understood. That you could feel that it was good. So Nachamish Gamzu had the ability, which essentially every Jew has. That's the whole purpose of the Jews, is to reveal the good hidden in the bad. So that's the whole thing also of when God took the Jews out of Egypt. Why God put the Jews into Egypt? Egypt was terrible. A lot of the destruction of the temple, first temple, second temple, Holocaust, these things are terrible. The Rebbe once wrote to somebody, I think I told you this several times, that the destruction of the first and second temple was worse than the Holocaust, as bad as the Holocaust was. But it only affected like 1/3 of the Jews or whatever, half of the Jews that were living in Europe. And the Jews that happened to be living in other places, is they weren't as affected, or at least they weren't directly affected. But the first and the second temple affected all the Jews. All the Jews were living in Israel. The temple was destroyed. Even the Jews living outside of Israel, they would come to the temple, right? The temple was destroyed. There was no temple. Every single Jew, and it could be that a bigger percentage of the Jewish people were killed in the first temple, in the first destruction, and the second destruction. A bigger percentage of Jews. It could have even be that a bigger number of Jews was killed, because Jews were very populous at that time. It says in the time of the second temple. So these were terrible tragedies that occurred. But that has been the lot of the Jewish people. The Jewish people were born in tragedy. They were born in Egypt. They didn't do anything. They were born in Egypt. But what's the reason is it says, this is a drawing down of godliness from what's called the world of concealment to the world of revelation. In other words, God's good is concealed from us. But God is infinitely good. In fact, God is so good that we can't feel it. We can't perceive it. And when we get it, it seems that it's bad. That God is doing it. It's like too intense. Like at Mount Sinai, the Jewish people said, we can't take it. It's too good. Too much. Moses, you do it. That's also the idea of the menorah in the Holy Temple. The menorah to illuminate the darkness. God said, I put you in Egypt and I'll take you out also. I, God myself. And that's what the first of the 10 Commandments is, which starts with Anochi, I. I am your God that took you out of Egypt. That's the first of the 10 Commandments, to believe in God that took us out of Egypt. In other words, that Egypt ended up being a good thing. If we weren't there, we wouldn't have gotten the Torah. That's also the whole idea of Nachomish Gamzu. Nachomish Gamzu, he sensed that even the bad things were good. There's countless stories about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, about him taking bad things and transforming them to good. People that had the tumors and conditions, and they just went away. I know a couple of people like that. They wrote into the Rebbe, and all of a sudden the problem went away. The doctor said, "What happened to your tumor? Did you have an operation?" I don't see it. Well, we'll call it tzaddikim, but all tzaddikim, even though, in fact, I'm going to tell you that story. I'm going to tell you the story about David Malul. That'll be my story for today. Let me just remind you, David Malul. Here we go. 1 second. Okay, here we go. But call it tzaddikim. The other tzaddikim, afilu shahaya machshavatam, even that their thoughts were al zeh derech, in this way. Haya nishar lamayla. All of the other tzaddikim, their prayers, they remained above. Like Moses, for instance. Moses wanted to go into the land of Israel, and he prayed 515 prayers to go in, and he didn't go in. He says, but his prayers were answered, but they were answered in a spiritual way. In other words, they broke through some sort of barriers in the upper worlds. And the barriers that he broke, that helps our prayers be answered. Kach, the same way, it would remain this way in the upper worlds, like it was in the beginning, without understanding, which is the prayers of the others would come down lower, would just bring to a lower spiritual level, but still we wouldn't see the good which is in bad. And this is the whole idea of the copper serpent that Moses made. That's why they had to put it on a pole. La, they needed this pole, lagbasa nachash, to lift the snake up, the serpent up. So the purpose of putting the serpent up on this pole to encourage the Jews to look at God, that's a little bit of a misunderstanding. The reason that they put the snake on this pole to look up at God is that the Jewish people should realize that the snake, this serpent that's killing everybody, its source is really good. It can be elevated. Namely, that they should look, the Jewish people should look up that the serpent had to be lifted up above, and they would look up above, kolomer, in other words, that the Jewish people should not think that this poisonous serpents that God sent, nifrad, are separate things from God. If so, hu ra mamash, it is really bad. The nishar ra, and it remains bad. Now, there's not too many worse things than finding like a poisonous serpent in your house, right? A massive poisonous serpent that just wants to bite people and kill them. That's pretty bad. You can't find anything bad. Says the Rebbe, no. The point is that it was not, everything comes from God, even the poisonous serpents, right? Now, that does not mean that you should, buy poisonous serpents or, put the what it was, the poisonous snakes or something like that, or scorpions in your bed and everyone. No, these things are bad, and they remain bad because we don't react properly. When we think at the nachash, when we consider that the snake, as it is lifted up, where is the source? It's not separate from God. There's not God and the devil. There's not God and the world. We say every day, twice a day, 4 times a day, that God is one. Shema Yisrael, that's the motto of Judaism. What does it mean that God is one? Nothing is outside of God. God is creating everything. Now, like I said, this aroused a lot of anger from a lot of religious Jews. They wanted to believe, and it's the same thing today, they wanted to believe that God is separate and that the world is separate, that the world is bad, God is good, heaven is good, and the earth is bad. Right? We just have to do Torah and commandments and just, hope for the best. And after we die, then we'll do good. And it says, Chassidut, no, that's not so. Of course, it's so, right? It's so seemingly, but in fact, it's not so. In fact, God is creating everything. Why is there bad? Because we Jews are not connecting everything to its source. It says, okay, there's other big tzaddikim that did it, and it didn't work for them. There's a lot of bad in the world. It says, okay, they connected it only spiritual. Their accomplishments were more spiritual. Something like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right? Until the Torah was given. Their accomplishments were spiritual. They fixed up Judaism spiritually. But factually, really in the world, it still remains to be done. Nachum Gamzu was one person that could do. Look about that. That's the whole idea of this copper serpent in the Zohar. And it's also brought in Eitz Chaim, etc. And Emok HaMelech, there's a book called Emok HaMelech there. And also, that it sweetens up bad things of the snake, of the serpent, the poisonous snake. And this is like Nachash and Nachoshet. This is what's called the Nachash and Nachoshet that explains that this copper serpent was really Tiferet of Klippet Nogach. Tiferet is the central pillar. It's called the central. That's called, if you want, it's called there's God's kindness. That's Gavura. There's God's severity. There's God's kindness. That's God's right arm. There's God's severity. That's his left arm. And Tiferet, that's the middle pillar. That corresponds to. I think I'm saying things that are. Let me just get this again. God's kindness is his right arm. God's severity is his left arm. That's what he said. God's mercy is the middle pillar. The middle pillar. The middle pillar, it says, goes from the essence to the lowest. God's kindness, it goes, so to speak, without any logic to it. Just kindness, just giving, like a person wants to give money to the poor, so he goes up onto the top floor of a building and throws out $100 bills, right? So it doesn't necessarily reach its place. Gavura means God, the rich person wants to give out money, but he only gives to people that are really fill the criteria. So he misses a lot of people. Tiferet, mercy, means it comes from the highest level to the lowest. People that don't deserve, poor people that don't deserve to get the money. So he figures out a way how to give money to the poor people also. That's Tiferet. So he says that's the idea of nechoshet, copper. The silver corresponds to kindness. It's white. Gold corresponds to severity. It's like fire. And copper has a lot of colors in it. That's like the central pillar that contains everything. So he said, therefore, he made the serpent, which is bad, but he made it from copper, which copper is it signifies the aspect of God's mercy from the highest to the lowest. What's called klipet noga, the natural part of Atzilut. And then by means of us looking above, that elevates the physical world. We elevate ourselves to its source. This, by the way, is the whole thing we've spoken about a lot of times, and it says in the Tanya, chapter 24, that's the whole miracle of Daniel in the lion's den. And the Rebbe claims over there that it wasn't really a miracle in the sense that it was, out of nature. That Daniel, because he was attached to God, so he realized that these lions are attached to God also. They're creations of God just like he is. He was created to be a Jew to serve God. Lions were created to be lions, right? To eat prey, but not to eat Jews. Lions cannot eat up Jews. If the Jew is connected to God, if the Jew is connected to the Creator, and he realizes that the lions are also being created by the same Creator, as a Jew has a job to serve God. Lions have a job to eat people, but not people who are serving God. And as when the lions looked at Daniel, they saw God, and they knew that God is creating them too. So that's what means that it gets elevated to its source. Sheme Olam HaTohu, what's the source of bad, comes from what's called the world of Tohu, which is very, very high. It was like an order of creation before God spoke, so to speak, began to create the world. Higher than that. The Aliyah, they said, by means of this, Mitgaber, the good becomes strengthened, dominant. The good, which is in everything, becomes dominant. Because Ein Ra Yored Milamayla, because bad does not come from above. Everything essentially is good. So if we see things that are bad, it means that they came from God, but we have to attach them. And how do we attach them? By saying, Gamzu Latova, everything is connected to God. By attaching it to the good, to the source, which we says is in Tiferes, in God's mercy of the nature of Atzilut. And that attaches it to the mercy of God, of Atzilut. So God wants there to be nature. God is Atzilut, another word for God. And God wants there to be nature, but he wants nature to be attached to its source. By means of this aspect of God's mercy, of Tiferet, of holiness, this sweetens up all the bitter things in the world and makes them sweet. That's the whole idea of peace. The Torah is here to make peace, and it is what to connect everything to its Creator. All opposites to the Creator. That's why God put us in the world, in order to fix up the world. And that's how we do it. It says all of the deeds of the tzaddikim are peace. And then afterwards, by realizing the peace that exists, that all opposites are harmonious in the upper worlds, by realizing that as the Jewish people, we're put into the world to make this revealed in the world. It's drawn down also peace, the Pamilya Shamata in the physical world, beginning in the spiritual aspects of the physical world, the lower worlds, lower than Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, until finally it comes down into this physical world, and bad transforms to good. But it depends on us. We have to look up. We have to turn our hearts to our Father in heaven. So by understanding and not forgetting, remembering God, that's why we have so many times in our prayers, remember, Zecher, there's 6 things you have to remember. Right? How God took us out of Egypt, how God gave us the Torah, how God provided us for in the desert, how we made trouble for God and he still helped us. And still. That's the whole idea of the copper serpent. So this whole thing of the copper serpent is telling us that the world seemingly is terrible. But if we would just attach our thoughts to the creator of the world, then that would take away the severity and the bitterness of the world, of the situation. And that'll help us get out. I remember once I read a book from one of these self-help guys. It used to be very tremendously popular. I don't know how it goes now, but there was a guy called, what was his name? Anthony Robbins, and he was tremendously popular. He used to make these they say coaching sessions like in big stadiums, and people would pay like $1,000 a ticket, just things that were. Anyway, I read a lot of his books. I didn't really get that much out of it, but one thing I did is that he said that he has this tremendous how do you say the desire is a better word for it. Anyway, a tremendous affinity for driving fast in a car, auto racing. He's not an auto racer, doesn't race, but he's a talented speaker. But nevertheless, he has a tremendous. So he's got money, doesn't lack money. So he went to one of these places and he said he wants to drive a car, wants to drive one of these, fast cars. These cars go like, 250 miles an hour. Tremendous. So they said, okay, so he paid up front. He said, if I wreck the car, here it is. And so they said, listen, the main thing of driving fast is the wheels have to be attached to the track. As soon as the wheels leave the track, then you're in trouble. And that's the whole problem with turning corners. When you turn corners and you go fast, so therefore the weight of the car, the centrifugal force, whatever, it sometimes makes the wheels leave the track. So you have to, it's a very, very delicate thing. You can't go too fast. It says, but if you feel that the wheels did leave the track and that you're heading for the outside wall and that you're going to crash. So they told him like this. He said, don't look at where you're afraid of going. Look where you want to go. Don't look where you're afraid of going. So he said, okay. So he started driving. And first of all, he was driving a little bit cautious, 100 miles an hour, 150 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour, 250 miles. I don't know how fast these things go, but I'm just making this up. Okay. So he said, 250 miles an hour, 270 miles an hour, 300 miles an hour is going. All of a sudden he felt, oh, that's it. The wheels jumped off. He had just a split second. He remembered what they said and he did not look, usually something, you look, it's going to crash into the wall. He looked where he wanted to go and suddenly it was back on track. And of course he learned from this a big message and he gave it over for his, his lectures and he earned, $5 million by this idea. But the point is still a point, even if I don't know if his story is even true, but the point is still a point, right? If you keep your mind on what the goal, what you want, if it's something good and ignore the bad, or even more to say that bad is just apparently bad, but really in its source, it's good. I have to just ignore the bad part of the bad, like with the prostitute. Ignore the bad part of it. She wants to lure me, to entice me, to make me act like an animal. If that I'm forgetting. But looking at the good thing, where is she coming from? Where did this lady come from? All of a sudden it's, this must be a test from my father. This must be a test, right? Well, I'm gonna, and therefore you can pass the test. And even more, says the Rebbe here, that's how we can transform bad into good. And I'm going to tell the story after we finish this. I'll tell the story about this policeman that I met and how the Rebbe did this for him. But we'll talk about that later. Here we go. Let's do this here.